So last but not least, we turn our focus to creative wages. As we have already covered in pandemic impacts, when you look at the creative sector by industry, there was substantial growth over the past 5 years, with a significant dip in 2020. So according to the Council for Community and Economic Research, in 2019, the cost of living in Buncombe County was 1% above the national average and the second highest in the state. And by 2020, it had changed to 6% above the national average, the highest in the state. In 2021, the living wage jumped to $17.30 per hour, or $15.80 per hour with employer-provided benefits. According to the Arts Council's new Buncombe County Creative Earnings Report, which is included in your conference packet, on average, earnings for creative occupations in Buncombe County are 14% lower than the state averages and 22% lower than national averages. You can see the full list of all of our creative occupations compared to state and national averages if you go to our website, ashevillearts.com/earnings. So, this is going to make the Minty thing a little more complicated. We're going to skip that question. I was going to ask you how the growing gap between living costs and wages is impacting you, something to think about. So this panel is moderated by Gwynne Rukenbrod Smith, Program Director for Mountain BizWorks Craft Your Commerce Program and Arts Coalition Chair for Sole Proprietors and Independent Contractors Committee. She is joined by Venture Asheville Director Jeff Kaplan, East Fork CEO and co-founder Connie Matisse, Just Economics Executive Director Vicki Meath, and Curve Theory owner and AIGA chair Reggie Tidwell.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. It's been a wonderful kind of conversation-filled day. So we're excited to talk about money today. I know. I'm going to actually start out with, I'd like Vicki to just take a moment and talk a little bit about what Just Economics does and what it focuses on and the kind of work they do, just so you all know a little bit more about what you're all about, if that's okay, Vicki.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. So Just Economics is a nonprofit, and our mission is to educate, advocate, and organize for a more just and sustainable local economy that works for all in Western North Carolina, because we know that our current economy does not work for everyone. And we focus on three primary issues, the first of which we'll get into a little bit more, which is living wages and working conditions. We also work on affordable housing, which has a huge impact on what we need to make in terms of wages in this community. And we also work on better transit. And we see all of these things as important pieces of the puzzle for economic mobility and stability in our community. And we work on these issues in a variety of ways. First of which is through policy advocacy. We are advocating for local public policy with the city of Asheville, Buncombe County, and some surrounding municipalities, and as well as state and even a little bit federal. So doing some of that work. We also have the largest voluntary living wage certification program in the country, and we lead a national network of living wage certification programs. This is how we intersect with the private employer sector. And then we do a lot of community education and leadership development. We believe that the best community change comes about when the people most impacted in the problems are involved and engaged in the solution. So we're doing a lot of grassroots community organizing with people that are impacted by the results of economic injustice.
That's great. Thank you. Before we jump into talking about the living wage numbers, can you talk a little bit about your certified living wage program and just go in a little more detail about that program?
Yeah, so, in North Carolina, we have some policy limitations. We don't have the same legal ability to pass a citywide minimum wage that's higher than the state. So like they've done in Seattle and San Francisco and other places around the country. So back in 2008, we said, how can, we passed a living wage policy with the city of Asheville for their employees, but we know that there's, a finite number of workers that actually work for the city. And so how can we reach the broader community and really work to raise the wage floor? And so we looked at a program out of the Tompkins Worker Center in Ithaca, New York for this living wage certification program. We brought that program here and launched it. And that program is meant to encourage employers to pay a living wage, to recognize employers that are paying a wage that's, a better starting place for an individual to begin to have some economic stability and opportunity. And then, encourage consumers to support those employers and businesses and really work to raise the wage floor in our community. And like I said, we've grown to become the largest living wage certification program in the country. And actually, and November 15th is International Living Wage Week. And we're going to be joining with living wage certification programs from around the world, like the UK and Canada and New Zealand. And to kind of celebrate living wage employers, to talk about worker needs across the globe, and to really work to raise the wage floor in this unique way.
That's great. Thank you for that explanation. I just thought it would be important for people who maybe aren't caught up on all the programming and what Just Economics does. So my next question, of course, is still to you, Vicki, is that the living wage in Buncombe County jumped from $13.65 in 2019 to, $15.50 in 2020, and then to $17.30 in 2021. So can you talk a little bit about how you determine living wage and the factors that are driving it up?
Yeah, so our living wage rate is based on the cost of housing. And we use a formula that uses fair market rent as determined by HUD for a basis of that formula. And then we've built in a little trigger so that if there's a 3% or greater change, our living wage will go up, right? And so for a number of years, our living wage was going up about every other year. And like you mentioned, the living wage has gone up every year for the past 3 years. In a pretty significant amount, right? And now we're $10 more than the minimum wage. Y'all, the minimum wage is still $7.25 an hour and has been that way for 12 years. So think about what the cost of housing was in Asheville 12 years ago and where we are now. Like, that's a problem. And this is exactly why we have this program, because we know nowhere in the country can you survive on $7.25 an hour. And certainly not here in Buncombe County or in Asheville. So we use that fair market rent as a basis and determine what would be the bare minimum that even just a single person would need to put a roof over their head and food on their table. If you're a renter in this community, for example, in order to get a place to rent, you often have to prove to your landlord that you make 3 times the rent, right? Well, the rent, fair market rent this year is around $1,000 a month. So if you are working full-time, 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, never taking a single day off at the minimum wage, you can't even afford a 1-bedroom apartment after taxes if you had no other expenses. So our living wage is based on the cost of housing. We know that cost of housing has risen dramatically over the past decade, and then more specifically over the past 3 years. And the pandemic has even made that worse. So we are seeing those costs rise much quicker than they were several years ago. And so that's what's driving the increase in our living wage rate. But, we believe that there's something fundamentally and morally wrong when a full-time worker can't put a roof over their head and food on their table without either some public support that you're often shamed and blamed for accessing, for private support that not everyone has access to, or without creative solutions to your economic challenges. And so we believe that we need to start with a living wage and grow from there.
And these living wage rates are for a single individual. These don't have, if you have a family and others of children to support, that completely changes that dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have to have some starting place. And so the concept of a living wage would be that if you were working full time, you should be able to, take care of the basic needs for your family, food, housing, transportation, healthcare, those types of things. So a living wage in concept is different for each family size. But in order to make a standard that we could apply across the board, we said, this is a better starting place. We have to start at the place where at the very least, a single individual could, like I said, put a roof over their head and food on their table. Let's start there. And it's been difficult enough to raise the wage floor to that point, but we need to start there and grow from there.
That's great. Thanks. All right, now we're going to shift the conversation from living wage to the cost of living index. So Jeff, the cost of living index in Asheville Metro jumped from 101 in 2019 to 106 in 2020, which is the highest in the state. First of all, can you explain what those numbers mean, 101 versus 106? To the audience. And then also, can you talk a little bit about what the cost of living index is and the factors that contributed to this increase, please?
Happy to, thanks. And first I want to acknowledge that this research in the report is compiled by my colleagues at Riverbird Research. I'm the director of Venture Asheville. So we are sister organizations. So that's why I have some notes prepared from the folks at Riverbird Research, Heidi Reiber and Dr. Maggie Smith. Because of the technical components of the answer, I want to make sure we got it right. So this is, forgive me for reading, but I want to get it exactly right. I think it's important. There's a number of different cost of living indices out there. We use C2ER's cost of living index. That's the Council for Community Economic Research, a leader in economic research, founded in 1961. And every year since 1968, they published the cost of living index. It's used widely in agencies such as the U.S. Census Bureau, U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, as well as President's Council on Economic Advisors, Brookings Bank Rate. It's the gold standard, right? So what makes up the index? There's 6 factors, and as Vicki was saying, housing is a huge one. There's 5 more, which I'll share: food, utilities, transportation, healthcare, and what I find really interesting is miscellaneous items, and that's defined as like appliances. So what makes appliance costs go up? Things like raw materials, things like transportation and logistics, all the things that we felt had such a crunch given the pandemic directly impact things like appliances and all the most miscellaneous items. Hence everything going up. So the average, the way this is, the COLI, the cost of living index is determined, is averaging out every location, every city, every metro in the country. And the idea is 100 equals the average. So the lowest in the country is somewhere in Texas at 75, right? We were at 101. Now we're at 106, and it's those increases in food, housing, utilities, transportation, healthcare, and miscellaneous items that bumped us up to 106. And while it sounds bad, right? Things don't sound optimistic. I do want to share some point of reference. Connie, you haven't been introduced it, but is it true you used to be you worked with chicken in New York City?
No, not, well, I worked with chickens, not in New York City though.
So in New York City, you're
Yeah.
familiar with the place?
Yes,
Because I can
I'm
see
quite
you, I
familiar.
can't see anybody out there.
Yeah.
Do you want to guess what the cost of living index is in New York City? If we're 106, what is it in New York City, Manhattan specifically?
Oh, God. I wouldn't have the faintest clue. I don't know. The 5% more.
245.
Whoa.
So we're at 106 and things look bleak,
Yeah.
right? Things look bad. And we are the highest in the state.
Yeah.
But considering the highest market in New York
I don't
is.
know if that makes me feel
245.
any better. But I'm glad you're framing it as hopeful.
I'm not sure it's going to get better.
Compared to New York City, Manhattan, we're great.
Right, but yeah, it is higher
That's when I
here.
was like eating bodega baguettes with Dijon from a packet for breakfast, lunch, and dinner when I was living in New York City.
Ramen noodles. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Katie mentioned percentage changes on the wages too, which I want to address briefly.
Yeah.
Our wages in Asheville are 10% lower on average, the hourly rate. I think the average was like 26 and change. And the average in the state of North Carolina is 28 and change, but nationwide, it's 30 and change. So that puts us at 14% behind national average wages. However, the median house cost in Asheville is just barely above the US national median house cost. So it's all these tensions, these mismatches that drive our cost of living index to go up to 106.
Fascinating. You said to Asheville's 14% behind the national average for wages. Do you have some thoughts on how do we change this? Like, what do we do to make this a better place with more wages? And maybe, Vicki, you might have an answer to that. Jeff, you may have an answer to that, but that would be like a question that I would be like, is what do we do? What can we do to make this better?
Do you want to go?
Yeah, I think I have a lot of answers to that. Let's see if I can articulate. I think we need a full court press, right, on this and being able to hit this from lots of different directions. One thing to note is when we talked about wages and the cost of a new house, also, we have the highest fair market rent in the state. So when we were talking about our living wage rate based on fair market rent, ours is highest in the state. We need a full court press. We need everyone engaged. So we need, and now is a time, right, for workers as well and people that are getting paid for their craft to really recalibrate and figure out how we raise wages, raise the wage floor in a way that's sustainable, but also lends to better, just a more equitable economy. But I think that we can do things like pushing public policy from the government angle. We can push employers from that angle, and as consumers we can support employers that are supporting the type of community we want to live in, and as entrepreneurs we can also not undercut our competitors by paying low wages and recognizing other strategies for building more just and sustainable and democratic workplace practices. So I'll leave it there, but I think there's multiple strategies.
Okay, that's great.
I'd love to piggyback on
Yes.
Vicki's comments. I'm going to ask you a question now. And I'm not the moderator.
No,
but
you're
I put a
fine.
microphone in my hand.
Ask
I can't
away.
help myself. Last time we met, you shared a stat with me. The 80% median income in, is it Buncombe or Asheville?
Asheville.
You know where I'm going with this.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
what's the number for us, for our audience?
So it's 42,000. I don't have it in front of me, but it's about 42,000. So this is what the city uses, right, to subsidize developers in building affordable housing. So if you're going to want to get some public tax breaks or whatnot from the city of Asheville, you have to provide some rent at 80% of area median income or below. In order to make that, you would have to make $20.24 an hour, working full-time, 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, to afford affordable like housing in Asheville.
So I realize this is the creative sector summit. We're getting really into data and numbers, but I think it's important. So I want to ground everyone to understand when we talk about raising the wage floor, the average income is about $42,000 a year in our county or our city. So at Venture Asheville, a lot of our work is in mentorship, financing, and events, specifically with high growth ventures. Right. So we don't work with Main Street or lifestyle businesses. There's a lot of resources for that in town that do a great job. We want to focus on companies like Eastfork and Moonlight Makers and Soulku in the creative space that are employing high growth strategies to scale their business. And that's cool for a couple of reasons, because maybe they lead to an exit event. Exit events create transformational, exponential, generational wealth opportunities. Maybe they use a strategy like New Belgium Brewing with an employee share ownership program, where everyone who worked at New Belgium, at least after a year, you started earning equity in the venture. And when they were bought by that Japanese firm, you had, I believe it was over 100 people who worked at New Belgium got a 6-figure check because they started earning equity. So as we're talking about how do you retain and engage in employees in this terrible labor crunch, having them bought into the long-term vision and knowing that they get a piece of the profit at the end of the day, right? Help them be with you long-term. And one more piece of that is when you're going in these high growth spaces, you're gonna have to diversify your labor force away from not just makers, but you're gonna need knowledge-based workers, people who do the marketing, which I understand is a creative job. You're gonna eventually need to hire like a CFO, right? And maybe a full-time accountant and bookkeeper, or maybe you have a legal counsel. So you end up having to hire higher paying knowledge-based workers. And so when you look at what's in developers and designers and engineers and other folks like that, so the average salary coming out of our program, Elevate, which is our mentorship program, is just under $70,000 a year, because so many of these employees are doing design, development, engineering, sales, marketing, et cetera, while they can still be in the very creative space. Like Moonlight Makers and Soulku are extremely creative, cool, fun companies with a high growth mentality that are keeping creative jobs and increasing wages, again, by using high growth strategies.
So I'll put you in the hot seat, Jeff. The word growth scares a lot of people in Asheville and Buncombe County, especially because you think about what we just talked about, sustainable tourism and the change that growth often brings to a city. And one of the most common phrases I hear is, we don't want to be the next Atlanta, right? And we want to maintain the authenticity of Asheville and what the culture and the community of Asheville. So when somebody expresses fear of growth, that word growth to you, how do you like to address that? Talk about that.
I asked them what happened to them as a child. We don't do that. Thanks for the laugh.
There's a few.
Can't see who's out there. What I find about entrepreneurs in Asheville is so many of them they want to create their own business for a handful of reasons: independence, upward mobility, putting their own destiny in their hands. And we have so many passion-driven, very smart, very clever, independent thinkers. But you do need, if you want to grow a business, let me finish that thought. You still need some business discipline to grow a venture. And so why is growth good and bad? My work from years ago was with disabled veterans, helping them start businesses. And you would take somebody with just an idea for a business and no business background, and you do entrepreneurial mindset training, and then a boot camp for 8 days on campus and 6 months of mentorship. And here's an example of growth, right? So this one guy, Benito, was a Marine in the K-9 unit, right? I told you the story, right? So he would jump out of a helicopter. This isn't a creative story, but he would jump out of a helicopter in Iraq and Afghanistan with a dog, right? And then do patrols. An IED blew up on patrol. The facade of the building came down on him and the dog. They both went to rehab and were both redeployed. So coming out of the military, Benito got into dog training, opened a business in, I think, Arizona called Patriot Dog Training. It's what he knew. It's what he likes. He likes dogs. He knows how to train them. And growth for Benito meant he was able to take his business from just him to opening a kennel. And with that kennel, he got to hire people. And after that one kennel, he could open multiple locations. So it went from a guy who was just coming out of the military, a service-disabled veteran, and growth for him meant the financial independence to create the life he wanted, as well as creating jobs for others to live the life that they wanted. So that's when I think about growth. We're not talking about, tearing down trees and putting up high rises. We're talking about the kind of growth that creates great paying jobs, that's fulfilled, meaningful work for folks.
That's great. Thank you. Connie, speaking of growth, East Fork has experienced great growth over the last 10? Have you been 10 years?
Yeah, it's been 10 years,
Yeah.
but it's been only, I'd say 4 years since the company.
Really has experienced great
Yeah.
growth. Recently, you raised your minimum wage to $20 an hour. Can you talk a little bit about why you felt this was important and the challenges that you faced as a company getting to that point?
Yeah.
A lot, right?
Yes, so we raised our minimum wage to $20 an hour in April. Prior to making the decision, it's been something that we'd wanted to do for a long time. And by the time we were able to say, okay, now's the moment, it has to be now, we hadn't really figured out the pluses and minuses of it to see if it was going to make it work. We just knew we had to do it and we had to figure it out. So we said it. 2 weeks later, we announced it, we did it. And we're still honestly now trying to backpedal and figure out exactly how we're going to cover. Exactly how we're going to continue to pay for this, because in every single year, understanding how drastically the living wage has gone up in Asheville, $20 is hardly sufficient. Like, we're sitting here at the stage talking about people being able to find maybe suitable housing that doesn't let the water in, much less be able to go to a conference or buy a cool outfit or go take themselves out to dinner. So it's hard. Honestly, it's really hard for me to pat myself on the back for raising our minimum wage to $20 an hour. And sitting here on the stage, my kind of the whole essence of my being wants to flip over all tables across the country right now and say, here we are, with just economics, trying to figure out how to move the pennies around just right to eke out bare minimum living standards for people in this country while billionaires exist. And it's just, we need to bring the conversation to what's happening in Congress right now, where there is a very vocal group of people in this country who are fighting tooth and nail to deny people bare minimum social safety nets. And it's, I'm seeing, East Fork, my company is being seen as this hero, if all businesses started acting like East Fork did, this is the way forward. It's bullshit. If every single, I am already putting pressure on other business owners to do what we're doing, but fundamentally, business in this country is not set up to succeed by being decent. The game is not rigged for you to be a decent human in business. And so I ended up getting on a lot of being involved in a lot of conversations around conscious capitalism, and I think it's bullshit. I think there's just no way if every I'm already extremely radical person, and it takes every single second of my day to try to organize my business in a way that allows me to provide my employees with some decent standards of living. And for me to go and convince all business owners in the country to do the same, it's not going to happen. And so I think that while we all have to continue having these conversations and battling with this tension of how do we do the best that we absolutely possibly can, given what we're giving, we also need to continue putting direct, constant, angry, violent pressure on people who are actually making these decisions, because it's going to take policy change that takes away the onus of responsibility on people like us to do these seismic shifts. So yeah, we set the $20 an hour minimum wage. We're using the MIT living wage calculator for a family of 4 to continue setting our standard moving forward. So part of, what can business owners do right now is first just like set those commitments and then build your entire business model around accommodating them. That's what we're having to do now. And then where you can, get involved in conversations at a policy level to make sure that people are joining you in the fight.
Well, and be real and authentic like you are, right? Like
Yeah,
call
sorry,
the
sometimes
bullshit when there's bullshit, right?
sometimes to my detriment, but
I think that's what makes East Fork as refreshing of a company and as admired as it is that honesty.
Yeah, and to just acknowledge how, like, someone was commenting on our Instagram yesterday. We posted a bunch of jobs and we were kind of listing out the benefits that we do offer right now, which, they're more expansive than most companies in the area. And also, like, it still doesn't live up to my standards of what we should be able to afford people. And I had someone in the comments going on, like, kind of just dragging us, being like, you think that's compassionate? Like, that's absurd. Like, these benefits are trash. And like, 12 comments later, they're like, here in Australia, we get this, and that. And I'm like, okay, well, sir, do I need to give you a lesson on like
US economy?
US economy?
economy.
Like, I actually don't have the space and energy to do that right now. Please go educate yourself, because it is an uphill battle. And yeah, we're tired.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about not only just the benefits, but other things that you do to support like a quality living life for your employees?
Yeah, I think that's really important to bring. If not, we're not going to all be able to just pay people wages overnight. That somehow, I think it's really important to think about money as part of a suite of tools that you can bring to employees to make people feel valued, respected, trusted at work. I think it's extremely, like, to say that money is not a critical part of that conversation is also a delusion. Like, if someone is just like coming to work for like good feelings, like, that's just not going to cut it. But those good feelings do matter, and making sure that people are feeling like at least they have a voice to express dissatisfaction, knowing that they're not going to be retaliated against, is also hugely important. And that takes a lot of effort in building a company culture where people feel really heard and listened to. Things that we're trying that are seeming to be helpful are in starting employee resource groups. Specifically, like, that was something that we have plans to roll out to the entire company, but specifically starting an employee resource group for Black members of our community, of our employee base, has been really important, because as we know, and as I'm sure Just Economics can speak to, the Black population in Asheville is dwindling. It is shrinking because people are getting pushed out left and right by inaccess to jobs. So when I hear people say, well, I don't want Asheville to be the next Atlanta, it's like, well, you don't want to have like shared wealth across people that aren't white. Like, what does that even mean, that you don't want Asheville to be the next Atlanta? Sounds kind of racist. I think, like, acknowledging that there are people in that suffering is a shared human experience, and that some people are suffering at the hands of government and other people at a much higher rate, and that is affecting the quality of their life at a deeper level, I think is really important. So employee resource groups is something that we're putting a lot of effort into this year. And also just like building in, like, talking outwardly about power dynamics and acknowledging them, not pretending that we're all on the same level. Like, I think that was a critical mistake I made early on as a leader, because I had never ran a business before, but thinking that I could like be everybody's friend and like just have these very authentic relationships with everybody ended up, causing harm, because the truth is, like, if we're continuing to run businesses in this structure that we're working in, like, I have to acknowledge the power that I have. And so just doing a lot of like bringing in different modalities to give language to that, so that employees can talk about that and acknowledge power dynamics that are in the room, has been really helpful. So again, these are all like kind of, softer things that are hard to like roll out a program for. But it's more of just like how do we enter a business, how as a business leader can you be very honest with yourself about what you can and can't offer at any given time. Really lay out the limitations and expectations of the relationship, understand that it's a transactional relationship in many ways, shapes and forms, and you can't be all things to all people. So that your team is really aware of what they're stepping into and what they can and can't get from you. Over promising and under delivering is just create time left and right. We do provide meals for team members. We've managed to figure out a really elegant way of just having a full-time kitchen person who makes amazing meals a couple times a week. We can keep the cost down at like $3 a person, but like we end up having these truly, today we had like Vietnamese beef noodle soup. That was lovely. And that's been really fun. But it's also tricky because everybody has different desires for like some benefit that is really important for one person is not that important for another person. And I don't know. I sound so pessimistic when I come on these things. Like we do all these cool things. I don't know if they matter at all. Like still people can like, when we raised up like during the pandemic, like we were already paying pretty decent. We were paying them a living wage, but people couldn't even afford to get their car fixed when it broke down. It's like,
There's something broke there, right?
yeah, something's really broken. So it's hard for me to give myself a pat on the back. And also I know that I'm doing the best I can, which indicates to me like this is a problem that all of us need to be tackling at literally every single angle.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit? I think one of the things that I love seeing, and there's nothing worse than you see a job posting and they say like salary commiserate with experience or whatever it is. And it's just like, I really love it when people are so super transparent about salary. You all are not only really transparent about what your pay for different jobs are, but there's no negotiation. Can you talk a little bit about that and where that comes from?
Yeah, it's such a big conversation. I think it's interesting also to have me at this table when we're talking about creative salaries, because East Fork often gets lumped into the creative sector. However, when we're looking at benchmarks, it's manufacturing is what we do, and the benchmarks for manufacturing versus creative sector are wildly different. Let's not even start about like this idea of like creative work versus non-creative work and all of the rabbit holes you can go in there. It's my opinion that you can be a creative person in everything you do, and there's no separation of those two things. However, because we're vertically integrated, we are having to think about wages for people on the manufacturing floor in the same conversation as people who are doing marketing and taking pictures of things and graphic designers. And there's, because we are people understand what other people at the company make, and we're trying to be as transparent as possible. Understanding that division of labor and seeing very quickly that there are certain demographics that get hired for these lower paid manufacturing jobs than get paid or get brought into like sales and marketing world. That was an immediate tension point, and I have fought really hard to sit in a very uncomfortable place of saying like, hey, yeah, graphic designer, like you might have been getting paid this much money at a different job. We actually aren't going to say that your work is more valuable than this person's work if you are coming in with the same level of work experience. And that's been really tricky because it means that there's a lot like the traditional way of recruiting talent to be, especially in kind of like the director level, senior manager level jobs. People come and they say, well, I was making $100,000 more than this. And we're like, that's cool. You should go work at that job then. Because we're prioritizing bringing pay grades 1 through 3 up, and it does make it really difficult then to hire for those more knowledge-based jobs. And so I think we're reaching a point like we have to. It's also you have to pay something close to fair market value for people who have spent their entire careers learning skills that are very specific. And so it's right next year we do have to figure out how to adjust our upper pay bands enough so that we're not being unfair to people who've gained that level of knowledge, and for our own business success to be able to continue paying $22 an hour to people who would otherwise be getting paid $7 an hour. We have to weigh the business needs with our more radical philosophies around salaries. I don't know that. So anyway, part of, I think what we landed on is that like listing out exactly like, this is what we can offer at this time. And here's why. Here it is. Like, here are all of the other reasons you might want to be involved in this company. This is only for people who are already getting paid like above $60,000 an hour. I would never tell an entry-level person you should come here for all of the reasons that aren't money. Like, and this, any idea that like people's lives and their purpose needs to be attached to the job that they do, and they should be like made to feel butterflies about coming to work when they're getting paid $22 an hour is like, that is also bullshit. Like, sure, that can be part of it, but that's kind of their choice. You can't just be like, come work at my company because you can be part of this vision, but I'm going to pay you $20 an hour and you can barely afford housing. Like, but for people who are potentially making, we just hired a director of marketing. He's amazing. He was gonna be done with his career and, you know, be a painter, have a nice life in Asheville. He took a salary that was far below what he'd been getting paid his entire career because he was really excited to work for a company like ours who valued the shrinking of wage disparity. So they're out there, you know, we've made it work. We just hired another woman as a director of sales who's going to crush it. And she took a job because she knows what she can do. And yeah, it's been tricky. But being really clear, listen out there, like there's just, obviously everybody I'm sure has heard that when you get wage negotiations involved, like that, there's just, it's ripe for bias. It's ripe for kind of promoting people who have those skills, like the ones that have made me really successful in my career, like my ability to like fight for myself and be really outspoken and show up like a man and, you know, be comfortable in uncomfortable situations. But the fact that our culture attaches value to that specific set of skills is part of the reason why so many people get undervalued at their workplace.
That's great. Thank you. Reggie, let's talk about money again. As a president of AIGA Asheville, you work with a lot of self-employed independent contractors. Can you talk a little bit about the challenges of pricing your work competitively and making a living here in Asheville? Just to pull out this Buncombe County creative sector earnings, I made a couple notes here. If anybody hasn't looked at it, you should check it out. Craft artists make an average of $8.21 an hour. Fine artists, including painters, sculptors, and illustrators, make an average of $12.15 an hour. Designers, graphic designers, make an average of $23.59 an hour. Designers, other designers, make an average of $28.35 an hour. Camera operators, television, film technicians make $13.53 an hour. Ushers, lobby attendants, and ticket takers make $9.52 an hour. That's pretty sad and depressing for the creative community.
It is. I mean, it really is. And if we're going to speak specifically about independent contractors in the creative professional services industry, I think ultimately the biggest challenges are being able to have their work valued in our community where people are actually willing to pay them what they're worth. I see a lot of companies just not paying designers what they're worth here. And then what ends up happening is designers end up doing like what you were saying businesses do with this undercutting. They undercut each other because they're desperate for work. I mean, they're trying to make the rent. They're trying to prove that they have 3 times the cost of rent so they can actually live somewhere. And because of their inability to get the ideal wages for the work and services that they provide, it kind of creates a desperate situation, and it's unfortunate. And then you add on to that, you have companies that are outsourcing their work to other markets, which really exacerbates the situation because now you're getting a scarcity of work where there should be an abundance of work because we're a tourist-driven, city. Our creative industry is what is bringing people here, and it's our craft people too. We were talking to someone about this earlier. That value you just said, $8 and whatever cents an hour for craft people.
$8.21.
That's really sad.
Really sad.
It's really sad to me considering, and it might have been us talking, because I was saying that, Asheville has this brand of being an artsy town, which is what brings so many people here to enjoy it. And the people that are creating that image, they're getting the least amount of money. There are a plethora of issues, I think, that are affecting certainly independent contractors. A lot of them are moving out because they can't make rent. They can't make enough money. And this community, I think, should be, and it has been, you know, the work that we do with AIGA Asheville and bringing designers together into a situation where we can talk openly about our, you know, we can talk work, we can talk shop, we can talk about what ails us as a creative, you know, what are our challenges, how are we overcoming those challenges? And what I'm hearing is that a lot of people are finding that when they talk openly about what they make, what they should be charging, like first and foremost, I don't lower my rates. You know, we had this whole conversation with our pricing for profit through Mountain BizWorks. It undervalues your work. It creates a stigma that your work is not worth what you're charging for it. And you can't come in and discount your work and then try to raise it later. And so when you have these open and honest conversations with people about that, you have designers that maybe not be, they may not be at that level of thought where they're thinking, they're in desperation, they're in starvation mode. I need to, you know, I need to charge as little as possible while making as much as possible to be able to, you know, put food on the table, make my rent. But when they hear that by doing that, you're bringing the value of the industry down, meaning that, you know, somebody that is going to go in and charge a respectable rate for the same kind of work, that business owner is going to say, oh, well, this person only charged that much. It's creating a myriad of problems. And I think those conversations are helping, you know, keep it honest and open so people can understand the mistakes they might be making. But, you know, I feel like more and more of those conversations should be, you know, on the stage. You know, I think one of the things that we as an organization, AIGA Asheville, are hoping to do, and certainly in the coming year, is have some panels, much like this, where we have those kind of conversations, because ultimately we want designers to understand their value. We want them to chart, I mean, not just designers, copywriters, designers, illustrators, computer programmers, UX, UI designers, all of them. We really want them to understand that to live here doesn't mean you have to undervalue your work so you can get a paycheck. You know, what we want to do is we want to force the industry, we want to force the business community to pay what we're worth and stop outsourcing, keep that money, that revenue in our economy, because that stimulates our economy. We all get lifted in that way. So, you know, there's a lot of conversations on the horizon. We've had many conversations in our board meetings about that exact thing.
Right. Well, and what Reggie's referring to is Craft Your Commerce. We did our fall workshop series, and we did our pricing for profit workshop with Veronica Edwards, myself, and Reggie. And I find also with product makers, they also undervalue themselves, and it's the same effect. Like if you are a jewelry maker and you work in silver, and somebody sees that you're working in silver and your ring looks about the same size, because the general consumer, when it comes to the maker product, is not really well educated on the process and materials, but they see a ring that looks the same size made out of silver for $55, and then they go to another booth and say similar ring for $120. They're going to devalue the ring because they're going to go buy the $55 ring because they're looking for that value. And
Exactly
what
right.
happens is when that person undercuts everybody else, it pulls, like you said, the whole field down, and then it pulls the perception, that perceived value, which is huge when it comes to the buying persona and that person's psychology around buying. It pulls that whole perceived value down, and then that just undercuts the whole field. And so, like, if as an individual artist thinking about you being responsible for pulling down the value of art, like, whoo, that's heavy,
There's a lot of
right?
weight.
So if you
Yeah.
put it that way, sometimes it can help people understand that they have to actually make sure that they're giving themselves and charging the value
Yeah.
that they're worth.
Can I piggyback on something you're
Yes.
saying? And so I think as much as I want to call out businesses for outsourcing to other markets, which I think is really sad. I mean, if you have to do, you have to do it, but there is a wealth of talent right here in Asheville. But one of the things, I can't put all of the blame on the business community. I do feel like designers, creative services individuals don't know how to market their work. Either they don't have the resources to market their work, to make sure that these businesses know that they're here. So I think that's a problem that also needs to be addressed. People need to be able to, you know, be visible. And without that visibility, one could say it's very easy for a business to say, well, I didn't think there were any agencies here. I didn't think there was any designers in this market that can handle this quality of work or this level of work. So we know Atlanta, we know Charlotte, we know, all these other markets have these kind of designers at the ready. So that's a big one, and I think we talked about it, that makers are the same. They don't know how to market their work. They need to be able to make sure that they're visible and that people know that they're here and they have wonderful products to sell.
Yeah, and I think you and I also talked about, like, a lot of times we hear this when we do our mentoring or coaching, is like, well, nobody will pay that. Right. So
right.
how do you respond when someone says that to you? Like, no one's going to pay that for my service. Why would I can't charge that.
I say, how do you know?
Yeah, you got to try.
Yeah. I mean, not only do you have to try, you have to understand the value of your work and not settle for anything less. It's a mentality, if you undervalue your work, so will everyone else. And so if that those open conversations I talked about also help people understand where they fit sort of in the salary and also just pricing your work spectrum. I think the more you understand that somebody who is very similar to you and does similar type of work, they're appealing to a similar market, or they're charging this much and you're down here, it's kind of an eye opener. You're like, wow, I don't have to struggle. I don't have to suffer as much as I'm doing, because my work can actually bring in the revenue that I want.
Yeah, I think we need to get rid of the phrase starving artist.
Oh yeah.
I hate that.
Yeah.
We are not starving artists. We need to be thriving artists. We need to come from a place of abundance.
Yeah. Thriving artist is a much better model. I think the days of starving artists, I think it's an age-old mentality. You don't have to be starving to be an artist, and you don't have to be starving to be you can be a successful artist no matter what your craft is, no matter whether you're a maker, whether you're a professional services provider. The world is buying up this work everywhere. And so you have to know that, you have to understand that, and that's where the value of your work comes from, and just that knowledge.
Yeah. Well, and if you think about living wage has gone up, our prices should go up at the same percentage that the living wage goes up. I mean, that's that mentality of thinking, because people are they're already in a mindset that they have to pay more for things, right? And we already know we have to pay more for particularly supply chain things. The amount of lumber, the cost of lumber, a 2x4 went through the roof, right? It went from like $2.53 to $10. It's insane.
Crazy. Yeah.
So, that mentality is already in the consumer marketplace. So as a creative individual, I encourage you to increase your prices the same percentage as living wages go up, because that people are already used to that mindset. And
well, otherwise it's not sustainable.
Exactly.
Just find another career, do something else, because if you can't charge a respectable rate so that you can support yourself and thrive, if you're not thriving, then you're doing something wrong. Right. You're not in the right industry.
Absolutely. All right. This has been a great conversation. So I have a question for everybody, and Vicki, you kind of talked about a little bit, but I'd love to have you elaborate. But how can local creative sector work together? How can we all work together to really address the wage issue? Maybe what are some short-term and long-term strategies? So does anybody want to go first?
Well, I think that we've kind of mentioned a couple of things. I think one of the challenges, right, in the creative sector is like when we're talking about hourly wages, and you're like, what hours do I count in the time that I've dreamt up this concept, and all of those types of things. But I think first of all, starting, not undercutting your own prices, recognizing the way that you price, the way that you pay other contractors or other employees or whatnot affects the community as a whole. And then also, recognizing the multiple factors that we need to influence to really try to raise the wage floor and raise the quality of life for people in our community.
That's great. Any thoughts from the side of the room?
I'm not going to put Connie on the spot again, but like I'd love to see more companies do ESOPs and maybe have an ESOP. I don't know. Those employee stock option plans, you know, we know what a tight labor market it is. I heard this morning that there are 8,000 unemployed people in our metro. That's Haywood, Madison, Buncombe, and Henderson County. 8,000 unemployed people and 23,000 job openings. It's crazy, right? So if you want good people who are going to stay with you for a long time and you want them to understand the journey and the mission and the vision, I'm kind of with you. I think conscious capitalism can be bullshit. But I think employers are always struggling with, how do I inspire my employees to be as passionate as I am? It's always hard, right? To have the same, do we want people to think like owners? And well, you can't make them an owner, right? Through an ESOP, right? And that's a way to do it. Other things are, I think there's never been more opportunities for artists right now, or people making products, digital products. I promised I wouldn't go there, but the NFT space, right?
You go there.
I know, I'm friends not getting egged already, but there's even TikTok is rolling out because of how much commerce happens on TikTok, a whole suite of e-commerce tools through the platform. So to the question, if I charge that much, who's going to buy it? You know, from the entrepreneurship world, right, the startup world will say, well, you haven't found your product market fit yet. If that's the value of your product, and you know someone will pay it, then you just got to find that market. That's a product market fit. And so that's having the entrepreneurial mindset. There's customer discovery boot camps you can go to. NC Idea does a really good one called NC Idea Labs. We'll have to bring one here to this region as well. But that mindset, you know, thinking like an entrepreneur doesn't mean you have to be the next Zuckerberg, right? You could be the next Matisse's. You could be Reggie as an entrepreneur, right? You could be a nonprofit leader as an entrepreneur. So that mindset, I think, is, I hope, I mean, I've kind of bet my career on it, that's a path of up mobility for individuals.
Connie, do you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I always do. Well, one thing to that note is that in order for your to have a successful employee ownership model, you do have to be profitable, which is not something we've been super successful at yet. So I'm not going to put the burden of having to deal with the taxes that would require, that would come from. Right now, none of our employees would want to own East Fork. Let's just leave it at that. Sparing them that. The plan certainly is to figure out a wealth sharing model, but that's something that we've been going back and forth on, of like which wealth sharing model would actually generate the most immediate wealth, because I think a lot of the ways that some of these wealth sharing models are set up are for people who have some level of privilege or family money or stability, where like they can kind of hedge their bets on a return in the future, where what we see is that the majority of our workforce really needs the money now for basic expenditures. And so we're trying to figure out what profit sharing looks like that could have a more immediate return. And there's lots of options out there and people are starting to think about this, especially like purpose-driven lenders are starting to think about different ways to support companies who want to generate more immediate wealth for their employees. And so it's encouraging, but also it's like kind of a newer field, and we're just kind of starting to get into it. One thought. The other thought that I feel like has come up, and I'm more just like curious to hear what y'all think about this. Something that comes up all the time for me when I'm invited into conversations about marketing your craft or growing a small craft business or growing a small craft creative business continues. Every time I have that conversation, all I can think about is like wanting to look a person square in the eye and say, do you actually want to take the thing that brings you joy in your deepest part of your soul and turn it into the thing that pays your bills? Like, is that what you want? Can we talk for a minute about what that means? Because maybe you shouldn't. And maybe people shouldn't be starting as many businesses. And I really believe that. And I'm happy to be challenged on that. But I would love a future in which we aren't like, I think it's such a disservice to my generation that this idea that find the thing you love and do the thing that forever, and you'll never have to work a day in your life. Like, it's just so exploitive and problematic. And wouldn't it be wonderful if somebody could do a job that feels based, like, decently fulfilling, that they enjoy doing, and then also go home and have space and energy to have creative pursuits that are not attached to capitalism and generating money for themselves. I'd love to hear what you think about that, and what everyone in this audience has to think about that. Because I also, like, I don't want it to, from where I'm sitting, I don't want me to be like, oh, well, I did it, but you can't do it. Or, you don't have those skills, and that means you never will. Because I'm sure there are plenty of skills that you can learn to be able to market your business. It's, do you want to do that?
Yeah, I'll take a crack at that. I think as a creative, it's good to have multiple creative outlets. So for one, I'm a graphic designer, which is what my degree is in. I'm also a professional photographer. Those things bring me passion, bring me joy. I love them. I do them even when I'm not doing it for a client. So, however, I also produce music, and that is the thing that is mine and mine alone. And I've been asked to score films. I've been asked to provide music for like backdrops of, little video clips. And I'm like, I will never do that, because you have to have the one thing, as a creative, we always risk, there's always the threat of burnout, and it's because, like what you said, Connie, you're taking something that you love, that you're passionate about, and you're monetizing it. And it's now tied to deadlines and client feedback. So the biggest thing is having a creative outlet that is untouchable. And even if it's the thing that you monetize, making sure you set aside time in that particular craft to do it just for yourself. You do art for art's sake, because if it all becomes monetized, then you forget about it. You're just your soul is gone.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Well, and to also address that question, Connie, for me, my kind of perspective is the same, is if you are creative and you're passionate about that and you're fed by that, that's great. But the reality of turning that into a business, let's be real about that, right? Because it's not, I hear all the time when I do my coaching, people are like, I just want to make.
Mm-hmm.
That's great, but then maybe you shouldn't have a business out of it. Maybe you should pay your bills in a different way, because you're not, as a creative business means you have to understand bookkeeping and financials, and you have to understand marketing and branding, and you have to be a good shipper, and you have to do this, and so there's like all the hats that you have to wear. And that's a hustle, and that's a lot of work. And
it takes you away from the creative aspect.
Or you have to have the capital to be able to hire people. And so that is just being real. And that goes back to those real conversations. And to me, in my experience, both as a glass business owner many years ago, and then also currently married to a full-time jewelry artist, the best conversations is when we are at the end of a day of a trade show, and where we're sitting around a table with artists, sharing the beers and shooting the shit. And people actually are being honest about, we do sometimes shoot the shit, honest about what we made that day. Like when you talk to artists and you go like to the Big Crafty or some of these shows, and you're like, hey, how's it going? How's your show going? It's great. I made my booth fee. And I'm like, that's not great.
Yeah.
That is not great. If you made your booth fee, that is not great. Now, if you take your time, you pay yourself for being out of the studio. You pay yourself for not making, you pay yourself the booth fee, plus you pay yourself the travel and all the other costs and then you multiply that by 3, that might be great, right? So like you have to really be real about what it means to make a living as a creative, whether it's services or products, and then to make sure that those people are ready for that entrepreneurial mindset, Jeff, which is kind of what you mentioned. And so really, like Connie, I think that not everybody who is creative should use that as their main source of income. I think it's just be about what works best for them and what feels good to them and authentically.
I'll share 2 quick resources in regards to that. It was an article that came out in the Atlantic, I think in October, titled "Your Profession is Not Your Personality." And in it, it's talking about burnout in all fields, specifically with entrepreneurs who like your life, everything about you, your personal brand is your company brand. And one of the tips in that article is make friends in a hobby that has nothing to do with your profession. Right? Like meet people who see you have an identity separate from your career. And the second is this classic book called The E-Myth, called The Entrepreneur Myth. And it begins talking about, a baker who is, bakes for, cakes and pies for friends and family gatherings. And everyone's like, your cakes are so good. You got to open up a bakery. So they open up a bakery. and does really well because he's making, this person's making great cakes and pies and baguettes, whatever. And they get so busy that they have to hire a second baker. Right. So now they have to learn how to do like HR and payroll
Yeah.
and negotiating salaries. Right. And then it's all getting so busy, you got to figure out how to do marketing. And next thing you know, they've got a whole team of people, and this baker is in a back office looking at paperwork and filing, literally so far removed from the thing they love to do. So knowing that, like the growth in a business, right? Again, as an entrepreneur, that journey, right? You have to translate from the technician to the entrepreneur role. And not everybody wants to do that. And by doing that, it might, sour all your feelings that you've had about this passionate project, this passion, medium.
That's true.
And resources, if you do want to be an entrepreneur, I mean, in Asheville and in West North Carolina, I'm so proud of the resources that exist here because there's a lot of them. Earlier, there was a conversation about entrepreneurship, professional development for creatives. There is one that exists. It's at Mountain Bizware. It's called Craft Your Commerce. If I'm not going to give it a plug, I'm not doing my job as director. But even Mountain Bizworks offers one-on-one coaching, and you can't afford it, you can apply for scholarships. We offer intensive classes that help you write a business plan. It's to start up. If you're interested in starting a business, we offer non-traditional lending opportunities. Then we have the small business centers that are scattered all over the Western North Carolina area, and they offer free classes and wonderful opportunities for growth and learning. We've got organizations and programs like Venture Asheville that if you want to grow and scale and really do high growth potential, I mean, there's just so many resources out there for you to make sure that if that's what you want to do, then it's your responsibility. You're making a commitment to yourself to actually take advantage of all those resources that exist. There's AIGA if you're in the design world and you want to understand how to connect with other designers. So it just, there is that opportunity here that when I talk about all those wonderful resources that exist, because we have such a large small business community, a lot of other communities don't, particularly rural communities and urban communities and, Black and brown communities don't have that support, and we do here. So if you don't know about it, reach out to us, let us know. We're happy to connect you to the right opportunities because they're here and they're developing even more. Because, that silver lining question that came up at the couple panels ago, the silver lining for us is that these opportunities have grown for the pandemic to support small businesses in West North Carolina. So let's take advantage of it and let's use it.
And I'll say not only take advantage of it, but make it a necessity, because a lot of creatives just jump out into starting a business because they have a product that they think is marketable. And so they're like, I need money. I'm just going to jump out and I'm going to do it. But starting a business should not be something, it shouldn't be a impulse, it should be something that you plan. Because if you don't plan for it, and if you don't actually set the proper foundation, you're just setting yourself up to fail. And I find a lot, certainly I've been in Asheville since 2003. I know a lot of people that have quit their jobs because they're makers and they come here and they're like, man, I make great pots, or I make great glass, whatever it is. They quit their day jobs and they just go out and start a business, and then they're back at some other job, 2 years later because it wasn't sustainable. Those resources are not only there, they are a necessity. And I can't stress enough that that's the way you want to get going in your business.
Absolutely. So lights came on. So I think the hint is Katie. It's now your turn.
It's time for the Q&A.
We could obviously talk.
You guys can still submit questions if you have more questions for the Q&A. So one thing, as I'm listening to this wonderful conversation, I think one of the important voices that is missing is the voice of the nonprofit and the challenge with paying, compatible wages when you work for a nonprofit organization. And this is not just the creative sector. This is the entire nonprofit sector. You're considered a charitable organization. And so a lot of foundations and grant making organizations, they are all happy to support your programs, but not give you any operating support. And I think a lot of donors feel that way too. They want to support the work, but not the people that are working behind it and keeping their lights on and things like that. So I think that's a real struggle that we have to address in the nonprofit. And, I know you know, Gwen, during the pandemic, there's been a lot of encouraging discussions about changing the way that grants are done because it is really not sustainable. So I just wanted to highlight that before we move into the discussion. So one of the questions that we received so far is what percentage of the workforce in Buncombe County are employed by businesses who pay a living wage? Do you have any idea?
No, I don't know the percentage, but we have over 400 employers in Western North Carolina that are living wage certified. I'm not sure the percentage, but whatever it is, it needs to be higher.
So the other question that we had submitted, are we below wage rates in comparable jobs in North Carolina or nationally, or do we have high levels of work in lower wage jobs? So what I'll say in the creative sector earnings report, we were comparing the same occupations, the same jobs from Buncombe County to state and national averages. So if you guys don't have any more questions for our panel, last chance.
I know for non-creative sectors, we're like far below national and statewide rates for things like CFO, director of sales, where Asheville's very below.
And I would say nonprofit rates,
Yes.
like salaries are way below too in Asheville, way below, even Western North Carolina. And being a director of nonprofits in the past, I agree 100% with Katie's. Your thought is, and we are seeing that movement where funders, particularly private foundation funders who wanted to only fund program costs, understand that there is a need to fund the operational costs too. And we're seeing some state and local and national arts councils. And then Americans for the Arts has been doing some really great work on an advocacy level. I serve on their coalition and they have a bill that is working its way slowly, but it's modeled after the WPA bill called Get Creative Workers Working. And I think it'll be really interesting to see what might come from that too.
Yeah. Well, oh, look, we got 3 questions. Thank you guys.
Oh,
Vicki was going to say something.
I wanted to just add something that was a track from a conversation we were having a while ago. When Connie was talking about policy, Just Economics works on policy. And personally, I'd rather be working on much more radical policy than things like raising the minimum wage that's been stuck for 12 years. But the reality is we need to do those kind of things. And I just wanted to mention that today something major happened at the federal level. We are one of the only countries in the world that doesn't provide paid family leave. So we don't have any federal policy for providing leave for the birth or adoption of a child, to care for your own long-term illness of a direct loved one. We have FMLA, which does unpaid, care, and some workers can take, or grief, things like that. Anyways, it's been in the Build Back Better plan coming out of the Biden administration. Last week, it was taken out of that plan. This morning, it was put back into that plan. And so just action alert to, Just Economics on our Facebook page has an action alert to call every, there's a bunch of legislative targets. I don't think Madison Cawthorn's gonna get us anywhere with that, but a bunch of other legislative targets that just need to hear from as many people as possible that it's, from a policy level, we need paid leave.
Yes.
Agreed.
So the next question, as an employee of a nonprofit, my hourly wage started at 20 and is now 21 per hour. I feel lucky that I was paid that much, but now I'm seeing that is low by today's panel. How do I negotiate up? So one thing I'll say is the averages that you're seeing is both for-profit and nonprofit all mixed together. Wages might look different if you're working in the nonprofit sector versus the for-profit sector. But does the panel want to say anything else to that?
as a former executive director of a few different nonprofits, if you feel that you want to negotiate your pay, I think it's important to have that open and honest conversation with your supervisor to see and let them know what it is that you want to get to your pay to, and then be part of the solution. Ask them how you can help get that. How can you help raise money? How can you help write grants or find funding opportunities? Or maybe you know a donor that's willing to give some money to help with those raising of all the wages in that nonprofit. So I think it's important just to be open and honest and have that direct conversation, and then be part of the solution suggestion and actual solution making.
Yeah, good point. And remember that we've just gone through a global pandemic, or we're still in it. So now might not be the best time. Yeah. So Reggie, what made it possible to get people to honestly share what they make and have the trusting community that you do?
All right, so first and foremost, if we had a similar question on our panel, is you got to find your people. You know, I think if you're in a community where there is trust, and I'll be honest, you can't just go up and have this conversation with just anybody. So there has to be a little more than rapport that exists so that you can have those conversations. But once you do find that community, we try to cultivate that kind of culture within our organization. Because, you know, Asheville, one thing that I can say about Asheville is it's not so cutthroat like some other, even though people might be shortchanging themselves just to get a job. There's a lot of collaboration happening. There's a lot of people that are, you know, I get referrals from other designers all the time, and I love that. And I love that about our community. But ultimately being able to find a community that that is your people, that you can have those open and honest conversations with about whether it's how much you make, how much you should be, you know, charging, about contracts, like what are your contracts? My first contract came from a fellow designer. You know, I didn't have one at the time. This was, you know, 20 years ago, but he shared it with me, and from there it's evolved from that. But it was nice because it, you know, I didn't have to do that legwork initially because someone helped me, because there was some trust there.
So Connie, same question to you.
Yeah, I mean, certainly echoing that statement for sure. And but then also like doing some like pausing and thinking about how it is a truly American cultural phenomenon to be so, to have the conversations about money and finance, personal money finance, be so weighted and attached to worth that they make people feel either like wildly ashamed that they're somehow deeply flawed at a personal level, or somehow shame that they have more than other people and therefore cannot talk honestly about the things they have and be grateful for and acknowledge their privilege in the same conversation. And that's not like, I think to realize that is like a collective feeling that we all experience, that somehow having conversations about money like lays our cards uncomfortably on the table and is too private to discuss, is rooted deeply in white supremacy. And acknowledging that as like something we want to move away from, at least like contextualizes the fact that we do have to figure out how to have conversations about how much people get paid, and how much people should get paid in ways that are detached from our own valuing of ourselves. And then you just start doing it. I think you just like anything else, the more you start talking about it, the more comfortable you get with it. And if you have conversations that are detached from emotion, you know, like if you can approach conversations around money from a functional perspective, especially with your employers, if you're talking about negotiating a salary with your employer, you know, I would suggest going in there and not saying, well, not trying to make a statement about kind of more nebulous value, but say like, hey, here's what I'm getting paid. Here's my bills. Here's the cost of living. Like, what can we do together? Like, you know, understanding where the company is going. Like, how can we work together to address this, rather than my mom told me that I'm worthy and I am, you know, whatever it is. So yeah, I think understanding the cultural context around why it's hard to have conversations about money, and then kind of examining your own personal relationships with money and you know, how you how you attach worth to it, can at least like maybe, I don't know, and then try it, find a friend and be like, hey, like let's try it out.
Yeah. I think ultimately, one way to normalize talking about money is to just start with somebody that you already have some rapport or closeness with, and just say, look, I'm wondering if I'm charging enough. This is what I'm charging for this project, and yada, yada, yada. And I feel like and that person may say, God, I don't even charge that much. Or they might say, wow, yeah, you're really low. And I feel like the more you have those kind of conversations and the more we normalize talking about money, the less stigma there is around it, the less shame there is, like you talked about, Connie. I think it's weird that we're so tight-lipped about it.
It's weird.
And it's something that we all need. It's something that we all obviously, our businesses need it to thrive. So have those conversations.
Totally. Yeah. Something we say a lot at our company is clarity is kindness. And a big lesson that I learned early on when negotiating rates with, or when thinking about how to pay creatives, I remember we were doing a photo shoot. We had always done I had modeled all the pots myself, where we just had grabbed somebody and put them in front of a camera. And I remember feeling so excited that we were able to hire a model and cut them a paycheck. I was thrilled, right? So we're gonna do it. And I got but because I had never done it before, and I didn't know how to have an honest conversation up front about payment. I didn't even think to be here's what you're paying. Do you consent to this or not? I just handed someone a check that for me felt I had asked around, what do models get paid in Asheville? And I doubled it. So I was feeling like I was some big benefactor, and was so delighted. And come, a year later, that the person very graciously said, why didn't we have that conversation up front? That check was a lot lower than I was expecting it to be. And I was like, thank you. Instead of going to a place of I'm a terrible person, what did I the lesson I took from that was, in the first email, you say, here's my budget. Does that work for you? Yes or no? And then you give that person the option, and all creatives can make themselves a rate card and list it on their website.
Yeah, I think that we have to get onto that. So I do think quite often designers and creatives don't know what to charge. They're having a struggle trying to find where they should be with their pricing. And I do think that one thing that is super helpful is knowing the value of your work, knowing not only where you fit in the spectrum, but also if you are working with a client, like you just said, Connie, come right out and ask them what their budget is. In terms of normalizing talking about money, that works with clients too. If you understand what their budget is, you can understand whether it's a client, it's a good match. When I do talks with clients, if I'm having a sort of a feasibility conversation with a client to see if this is possible, I'm not going to waste my time with someone who is thinking that I'm a just out of college designer and I'm charging college rates. It's a waste of my time, and it's a waste of their time, because ultimately I'm not going to take the project. So I think we should all be having these conversations about money.
You and I have talked about, setting some kind of wage standard list, so both people know what to charge and people wanting to hire them have a clue about, this is what this really costs. So I think that might be helpful.
And there's a national nonprofit out of New York that does that, called Wage. And they actually have it defined, if you're going to participate in an exhibition, you should get paid this much. If you're going to do a performance, you should get paid this much. If you're going to do a graphic design logo, you should get paid this much an hour. And so they already have kind of some national established standards, which is really interesting.
So is that adjusted by region, or is that just national?
Yes, they adjust it by region, but at the same time, they also are based out of New York. So they have a lot of their standards are New York standards. So if you're up there, then at least you can adjust based on kind of their cost of living versus your cost of living in the area that you're in.
Well, and as we know, the cost of living index, if you're making the same amount of money in New York, you're great. So Gwen, this question is for you. What are some of the unique funding opportunities at Mountain BizWorks for artists?
Oh gosh, that's so first of all, what's really wonderful, and you may or may not know this, but Mountain BizWorks is what's called a CDFI, Community Development Financial Institution. There's about 1,300 of them across the United States. They were formed in the Bill Clinton era, I believe, and they are mainly they're non-traditional lending institutions. that are actually to support and provide lending capital for small businesses, particularly minority, women, and rural-owned small businesses, those businesses that would not get a loan from a traditional banking institution. So there's a lot of opportunity for you to seek out and to inquire about lending opportunities for creative-based businesses. Our lending last year, in the last 3 years, we did $1.7 million in lending loans to the creative community in Western North Carolina. So Mountain BizWorks is covers 26 counties of Western North Carolina. We don't just function and focus on Buncombe County. So creative-based businesses certainly can go through the lending process. If you have a business plan, that's a great place to start. If you don't have a business plan, I recommend that you sign up for our foundations class or a class. Small business centers also offer these classes. So I don't want it to be only about Mountain BizWorks, but there is a lot of learning opportunities to create a business plan from some different service-based organizations in Western North Carolina. And then you can reach out to the lending team, go to mountainbizworks.org, and there you go to the lending section. And if you haven't taken a class from us, you can submit as a new client. And if you have taken a class from us, you can submit as an existing client to explore your opportunities and your options. We also have some really interesting funds that are very specifically been developed and focused on the BIPOC community and small businesses in the city of Asheville, as well as Buncombe County. And that we would find also on Mountain BizWorks. It's called our Multicultural Catalyst Fund. And then we also have, and I'm going to let Jeff talk about NCCF a little bit too, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's the Mountain Community Capital Fund. This is a really fantastic program modeled after the Charlotte Community Capital Fund. This is a loan guarantee program. So we're not sitting on money to loan out, but we serve as, and I'm the chair of this committee, this city and the county. We serve as the guarantor of your loans. So if you get an SBA loan, the government, Uncle Sam is your guarantor essentially. So this is for specifically entrepreneurs of color who may have a criminal record, who may have no credit or have no collateral. And these are the folks that we, literally the people of Buncombe and Asheville, like our tax dollars go into this $450,000 fund as the guarantor or the guarantee of the loan. The loans, however, are still underwritten and executed by our 3 CDFIs. Carolina Small Business Development Fund, which is Western Women's Business Center, Mountain BizWorks, and the Self-Help Credit Union. And we're tapped out. After just over 13 months of lending, we've lent out all $450,000, but we've got a number of requests out through ARPA dollars and foundations to replenish that. There's about $2 million in the pipeline. So we know specifically coming out of like Mountain BizWorks, right, and the Catalyst program, we got about $2 million in the pipeline that we need to fund for these folks.
Yeah. Perfect. So this is left. Oop, I just got rid of it. Sorry. The last question was asking about in the next year, do you see the living wage index or the cost of living index and the living wage like going up like it jumped in the last year again, or you think it's going to stabilize?
We're in the process of taking a look at that and our formula and all of that stuff right now. But what I will say is that the cost of living is continuing to rise, and that this is a starting place. It does look like we actually use a 4-year average of fair market rent because fair market rent jumps up and down. And fair market rent for 2022 is actually less than 2021. So I can't say that right now. What we see is going to happen with our living wage rate, but I do think that we have to understand that the costs of living in Asheville, particularly housing, are continuing to rise and will over time. That was a completely nebulous answer.
I know.
And I'm not going to put you on the spot, Jeff. I know that's
No,
not your
I'll
wheelhouse.
say that if you look at the market overall, we're facing like an incredible amount of inflation, right? Goods cost more, right? Therefore, consumers have to pay more, meaning people who work to have an income to buy things need more money, right? And at the rate of increase across those 6 factors and others, based on supply and demand principles and supply chain issues and logistics and just the access to materials, this trend is showing no signs of slowing down, right? That's why Jack Dorsey tweeted hyperinflation, and everybody freaked out that he was the first person to say it out loud. Because it's still like the
Should give
Fed.
people some money. Yeah.
Are they
just-
profitable?
I mean, he personally
He
is
personally
quite
is,
profitable. Yeah.
Square was a good one for him. Twitter, not so much, but
Yeah.
Square, he did all right,
I mean, he's got a lot of money.
I'm sure. Yeah. Speaking of bastard billionaires, anyway, we're going with this. Yeah, the Fed doesn't want to acknowledge it. US Treasury doesn't want to acknowledge it, but like I'm a marketplace junkie from NPR and Planet Money. And everything was clearly, we were in a state of inflation that's running away from us. Therefore, you could expect cost of living indices to continue to rise.
On that positive note, please join me in thanking this panel.